Welcome back to the Success Times Happiness podcast. Today we have a very good friend of mine, Justin McNamara, coming in the studio. He is an occupational psychologist, a member of Universal Man, which we'll talk about. But also what's interesting with Justin is that he has had to tackle some really challenging life decisions in recent times. And so I have found, knowing him, I have found like ultimate strength and in the way that he's gone about those decisions. And I think a lot of people during their lives will come to a crossroad where they will need to make big decisions. And I know that I have as well. And so I thought it would be wonderful to get him in and talk to him about those crossroads and the strategies and the implementation and the strategies and tips that he used to make those life decisions. So let's get into it. Justin McNamara, welcome to the Success Times Happiness podcast.
Thank you for having me, Richard.
Now, we basically have met through school. Our kids go to the same primary school, and I've had the pleasure to get to know you and become closer mates over the last, I'd say, year to 18 months.
Let's not stretch it too much, yeah.
You jerk. But let's go back a little bit. Occupational psychologist. Mm-hmm. That's you. Mm-hmm. That's what you do for your crumbs. Mm-hmm. What is that?
I basically work with big companies and help them with who to hire and who to promote using things like psychometrics and fancy machine learning models and those sorts of things.
Okay. Do you think there's skill sets there that have helped you in life in general, or is it strictly that's business and?
No, well, it's people oriented, right? So obviously you do all your undergrad training in psychology and those sorts of things, and it definitely helps with systems thinking. So, for example, I started in the railways, and if you had an accident there, you wouldn't look at, say, the human. Right? The human would be one part of a wider system.
Right.
So there was a very dominant theory that's quite nice visually called the Swiss cheese model, right, from this guy called James Reason. And the idea that if you had a catastrophic event like a train derailment, there were a series of failures in your protective system, like a slice of Swiss cheese, right? So no particular layer was perfect, like a human, right? They could have bad night's sleep. But the idea that the catastrophic event was lining up a multiple series of failures. So I like that systems thinking of who we hiring, how we training them, what's the engineering going in, what's the culture that's being created, what's the behaviours that are being rewarded. So I think that stuff helps. And then more recently, doing a lot more of the fancy stats, the coding side has been wonderful for resilience training. The idea that every day I will want to throw my computer out the window because suddenly I'm getting these quirky error messages that make no sense, but every day you overcome it. Mm. So there's definitely been some transferable skills.
You have two young boys. Mm-hmm. What does your morning routine look like at the moment?
So it varies when I have the boys and when I don't. So they're with me half the week. So my morning routine when they're with me is one or both of them jumping on me at too early o'clock.
Yep.
Negotiating screen time in response for their preparations and compliance with getting dressed, eating a moderately healthy breakfast, and then not running around like a headless chook, but ticking all the boxes of packing lunches, washing up things, making sure that the eldest doesn't forget his shoes again, when we go to school. So, there's a lot of things that just focus on getting out the door with then thinking about how am I going to best spend sort of the 4.5 to 5 hours before pickup. Mm-hmm. So that's one half the week. The other half the week is how do I win the morning? Because I can struggle on some days if I'm in a difficult patch. So often that's get out the door for a hard run. I'm hot and sweaty, so I've got showered, so then I'm dressed for the day. My body's been exercising, so I've got to feed it well.
Yep.
I need a social connection. I'll go to the coffee shop. I've got caffeine, I want to do some deep work, and it's 11 o'clock and I've won the day.
You don't think you can, or is there no focus on yourself when you've got the boys in terms of that morning routine?
A little bit, but it's definitely, it's like a to-do list, right? So in a sense, I feel more relaxed when I've ticked the box. They're both fed. They're both dressed.
Yeah, sorry, I'll rephrase. That to-do list, when you got the boys, is there anything for you on that list? Or is it simply just so focused on getting them adequately to school or whatever the role is, the job is that day?
Mainly to feed myself. That's it, right? To make sure that I've got some protein and carbs to get me going. That's the main focus when I've got them pre that 8 o'clock cutoff, and then I'll transition to me once I've done drop off.
Yeah.
Right? Then I get a nice coffee and I'll come back and plan my morning.
Because you run your own business, and so there's obviously advantages and disadvantages to that. How have you managed that expectation, or at least how would you look at success with your business at this point in life? And I guess how does that relate to success in other areas of your life as well?
Yeah, I mean, you sent me a message about, what would success perhaps look like for me, and it was just one word, and that's autonomy. That's what success looks like for me.
Okay.
And so I've got that in my work because there are two main sources of income there. One, it's a SaaS product business, right? So I've got psychometric tests that, flock through retailers and those things. And that happens while I sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is this freedom to do really interesting work. So I'm fortunate to work with, companies like BHP, where I'll build custom assessments or other sorts of things. And it's awesome because often when I'll start this stuff, I don't know how I'm going to solve it. Right? It's a problem that feels beyond my capability, and it's hard, and it blends people and data, and they treat me like a king and pay me really well. And I do it from home in board shorts on the Sunshine Coast, and I can still pick my boys up and
go to cross country.
It's awesome, right? So that's great, and success is having that freedom. Picked up the boys last night from I have to take them to a keto, and we're going to sushi because I'm too tired to cook, but being able to do that and make that choice to after I pick the boys up, to say to my eldest, let's play cricket in the park until it's dark.
That autonomy has the ability, or has the potential, because you're not striving, right? So we just talked about upstairs this idea of if you're in the gym or if you are running your 5K and there's objective data that you want to improve on, and that pursuit for you at least sounds like a never-ending goal. Like it's always you're just trying to push more tin or you're trying to get faster. If the goal of success in life in general, or business, let's say, is autonomy, you're already there. So what's driving you to do more or to do better? Or is there not?
No, there definitely is, mate. So if you look at the psychometrics, every year I feel compelled to make them better, right? Because if I don't, I guess it's my reputation.
Is it a fear that autonomy will go?
No, it's not about the fear of the autonomy. There's definitely fear of failure, probably more fear of letting others down.
Right.
The idea that I don't mind if I'm consciously incompetent, but I do mind if I'm consciously so, right? So if I were to push this test to market and it wasn't as good as I could possibly make it, right, that would be a failure.
Right.
And so every year I'm, what would I spend on updating the tests? Over a month full-time, maybe even 2 months full-time just on the products.
Right.
And that's researching, fancy algorithms, for how to score them.
And that's simply driven because you want to be able to lay your head on the bed at night thinking, I've done everything I possibly can and I don't want to be incompetent.
Yeah, part of it's the incompetence, but part of it is that search for excellence, right? It's the idea of, could I make the reports prettier? Could I have this mantra for the platform. So a lot of the tests are delivered by a platform, but you've got resellers, right? So there's lots of other users using the platform. And the mantra for me is one less click.
Sure. What
could I do to remove one more click for an admin user when they're creating, pushing out this test to a candidate or something like that? So there's what's just similar to what we're talking about upstairs with the exercise. It's more. And it's not like massively more, but it's what's that next 5% more. And it doesn't go away and it never will.
But that's what's driving you though? More so than it's almost like that autonomy is almost like as a result of that pursuit of excellence.
I think they're probably tied together. Like if I think about my career path, I've always enjoyed roles when I was managed, when I was an employee, where I was given a large degree of scope, large degree of autonomy in the sense you've got these 6 tasks to do. You govern yourself, right, of how you're going to do that. And so I think that comes down to working for myself. I really get that autonomy and also the frustration with bureaucracy I felt in working in large multinationals. So there's definitely that there. But then I've always loved excellence. Always loved it in sports, growing up watching, the Australian fast bowlers or like a Pete Sampras, in tennis. I just was magnetically drawn to people, Roger Federer. There was just this effortless pursuit of perfection that they kept on going. And it wasn't an end state. It was this constant routine or rituals to get that a little bit better. And that's something that's really, I think, served me well professionally, where if not every day, every second day, I'm reading another journal article, I'm reading another blog post, or I'm reading another book. And we talked upstairs around this sort of social comparison, right? So for me, I will benchmark myself not against my peers in my profession, but the very best, machine learning engineers, or the very best psychometricians, the very best psychologists, of which I'm none of those things, but to me, I look to be the Venn diagram that combines all of them.
Yeah.
And thereby, by doing that small little lifting every day, makes no difference. Every week, every month. But now, working for myself for 13 odd years, now there's a delta.
Yeah.
Now there's a gap.
So an area that I'd also like to touch upon is that relationship with happiness. And so you talked about Pete Sampras, or even extend to Andre Agassi. And I don't know whether you've read his book, which is exceptional, but I think there is a cost, at least, of some degree, with respect to excellence and how in one area of your life, let's say, and how that relates to happiness across your entire life. And I find it interesting that you come from a place of comparison. So even with your with Jim, you'll know where the 50 percentile is, and that's your stand. That's where you start your launch from. It's not, and then you do that, and you're like, well, I want to be better than that. I want to push away from the average, I guess. But that's still there. That's the starting point of I want to compare myself to the very best or otherwise, rather than internalizing and going, you know what, I'm going to try to be better than I was yesterday, for example. And that's the drive. But what inspires me, and the reason why I think Propel really wants me to talk to you on this show, is your relationship with your own belief of happiness. And that I think there's an enormous amount of courage that you have that I don't have, but for you to say that that's such a high priority for you. And whether that's driven from when you look yourself in the mirror, and go, this is the person that I see, and I'm interested to know what that person is for you, or whether it's driven from a place of wanting to show your boys what the pursuit of happiness, what that means to you. But I've definitely find knowing you more, your strength to say, I know that I can be happier and I'm going after that, rather than just accepting mediocrity. It's almost like excellence and happiness. That's what you're striving for. And there's enormous strength there, I think, to be able to say, I know that I'm not there yet, but I'm on that path to find it. Whereas I think a lot of people would say, that's just the cards I'm dealt.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not. I could be happier, but I'm not even looking at that because that's scary.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, but for you, obviously, I'm intrigued as to whether that's always been something inside of you to go, I'm always searching to find happiness and a place of peace in life, or whether it's a new thing. But I've always been incredibly amazed at your strength to be able to say, yeah, I'm searching for that.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting with I probably wouldn't align it as in I'm searching for happiness. So happiness for me is probably being present and content in the moment.
Right.
And that's one of the things I love about, my boys. And as you would see in your own, and anyone would see in their own kids, they're in the moment.
Yeah.
And so often I'm not. I talked to you before around doing something in the gym, and that momentarily happiness disappeared. Like a little butterfly, almost instantaneously, and I was in the future, right, with the next goal. So for me, it's probably more rounded excellence in a way, right? In a sense, looking at different aspects of my life and observing, almost like if you imagine you have a wheel of, financial success and work success, noticing this huge divot in that close interpersonal relationship. And that was incredibly apparent to me. And it's probably, it's very painful to realize that wasn't going to change. And so I think that was the real powerful realization. And to your point about, was it for the boys and those sorts of things? Yes, I was very conscious of legacy for them. Like, what am I teaching them? And initially, for several years, driving for the business was at their detriment. I had my head up my ass about that. I'm so busy. I'm so important. I need to drive the business.
Yeah.
And this is work. Rather than valuing the small moments when they would run into the office, or just realizing that being time with them was far more important than a stupid proposal. But there was a very powerful recent shift to say, I'm worthy of being loved. That was the transition, and that was very new and also very powerful to sort of walk through the implications, right, of then leaving a 21-year relationship.
I would say the vast majority of people are if they're in that relationship, stay. And for their own reasons. But I find so much strength with you to be able to say, yeah, I am worthy of love, and that's not here. And despite the challenging implications that will ensue, I'm choosing the more difficult path. How long did you sit with that for, do you think?
I think with any relationship that's in a tough bit, you oscillate, right? And that oscillation happened for us for well over a year. Actually it was peppered throughout, right? We had certain moments where it didn't look like it was going to continue, and then we did. So it's less about how long it took. It was probably more crystallizing moments where I got the insight. Right? And so the sort of moments were more around contrasting my aspiration for the relationship with what it actually was. Yeah. And I still have times now where I'll catch myself where I think about, if only I did more. Right? I really failed, say, on that partnership front because I was so focused on the business, right? If only I was more present, if only I was more supportive. And you need to catch yourself about where the relationship actually was versus this idealized Hollywood vision of what you think it could have been if only I did X. So that was a very powerful realization. I had almost a out-of-body experience one night where I was somehow looking at myself 20 years in the future, and all I had was how my eyes looked back at me with this sense of disappointment. Not disapproval, because this future me was still in the relationship, but this disappointment of, oh shit, I hoped you would have done a better service to yourself. So that was another breakthrough moment. And the other was this contrast of, it's one thing to accept suboptimal for yourself, but I'm role modeling love for two young men. And this is the primary illustration of romantic love that we're exposed to. And they were already asking me very difficult questions, like, girl, why doesn't mama want to kiss you? That I couldn't answer. And so the thought of sitting with them over a beer when they're, 15 years older, and probably not being able to look them in the eye about why I was still in that relationship, those things in concert were incredibly powerful and motivating.
Yeah, it's profound. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's when you get to that decision, you think you have a known quantity of that relationship and what the potential could be, right? And the family unit is together. But your happiness, let's call it, is capped to a certain percentage of 100. You know that this is not going to be 100% ever again, because that's, that's why you're here in the first place, making these decisions. But you know the quantity and the family's together. Then you have another option of, well, I'm potentially only going to see my boys half of the time, but my happiness outside of that is infinite. But it's certainly, there's some sort of discount with not being able to see my kids half of the time. I've seen you as a father, and we talk often, and so that I would imagine that would have played a huge part, or was it because of how strong that sensation was 15 years down the track where you couldn't look them in the eye? You were like, well, there's nothing that would cost, like not seeing them half of the time is a sufficient, I guess, expense to showing them that this is what you've done for that reason.
Yeah, well, even though I love numbers, I don't think as analytically as you do around breaking that down. So that I didn't go through that style of thought process. It was probably just reaching that emotional set point of I have to make the change. This is the right path for me and consequently for the boys as well. It was only when that decision had come to fruition and then starting to go through some of the challenging, legal side of things where initially I wasn't seeing them half the time. And I didn't even expect that. So that assumption of even the bare minimum of half the time wasn't on the table for several months.
So then how do people who are thundering towards a very, very difficult decision in life, whether that's relationships, work, otherwise, what's your advice on strategy around that? Because it sounds like you were propelled to a point of saying a decision needs to be made here. And that's almost accepting that the status quo is no longer acceptable, therefore a decision needs to be made. How would you advise people to making, critically life important decisions? Because this is one of the biggest, right? And in the same sense, I think anyone can be, from any age, can be confronted with huge decisions to make. How would you advise someone making a very big decision, and what, if anything, would you have changed knowing what you now know?
So it's about values for me, right? You've got to these big decisions have to be aligned with your values, right? Those core beliefs or principles that define you for you. For me, are about sort of like legacy. If I'm not in the room, when I pass, what would people say about me? And so this was one of those things where it just reached that point, right? It reached that threshold where there was just a disconnect with values and inner beliefs. So it meant an action, as large as it was, had to be taken. So I think, for others, first step are what are your core beliefs or your core values.
That's an exercise, physical exercise you would do. You'd sit down with yourself and say, what are the values that I stand for?
Yeah. And you could easily do them on the internet.
Yeah, there's like 200 very quickly you can find.
Well, exactly, right?
Yeah.
You can, I'm trying to remember the name of one of those pop psychology ladies, but she has ones like lists of 200 words, right? And you can go through and cherry pick them down in a series of stages. We've spoken about you, man. We do that as like an exercise, right? To what are your core sort of values and beliefs to set your foundation, because then that's your touch point for any key decision making, right? You need to understand what your true north is.
Yep.
So I think that's really important. And I think I'm never one of those people to go back to change things. I have cognitive dissonance around that, because to then go back and change the past, I wouldn't have the present. And so part of what's helped me navigate a lot of the darkness, right, particularly in times when I wasn't having access to the boys that I wanted to, was actually not to move away from those dark feelings and thoughts, was to step into them. And so there's a patent pending technique I call the shit waterfall. I think it's got a lot of marketing traction. But that's where I'd actually, visualize all of this crap, right? Whether, I've made a mistake and I should try and go back. And I would step into that, right? So I would feel everything around, this is a mistake. If I had a magic wand, right, and I could go back into that relationship. Yeah. And the idea is I'd let all of those thoughts and beliefs just rain down on me. But like a waterfall, I could step through it. Mm-hmm. And then I could dispassionately look at any of that shit that had actually stuck. Yep. And look at what was there and if that was rational, right? If that was actually aligned with my values and the beliefs. And I found going through that process initially really uncomfortable to step into that darkness and just let all of those thoughts flood my mind. But then to sit with them for all of a couple of minutes, maybe as you go for a walk, 90% of them would then just drift away to nothing.
Yeah.
And that then became incredibly liberating because I could just release all of that stuff. And any time a thought or a belief or a feeling came that would be aligned with that gust, right, that style of thought from the past, I then had an answer for it.
Right.
I knew my stance on it.
Yep.
And I could then quickly and easily let it go.
So you first find the values that you're aligned with, your true north, where you're basically finding where you're 2 feet on the ground when you're making a decision. And then your suggestion is post-decision made or pre-decision made, you embrace all of the doubts you have with what decision you're going to make.
Well, I did it post,
Yeah.
right? But if you wanted to do it pre, right, if you're able to do that cognitively, then you can game it, can't you, right?
Yeah.
You can game, okay, path option 1 is this,
Yeah.
right?
Feel everything that maybe you are doubtful of or are worried about that outcome, and truly embrace it and see it for what it is and realize that most of it won't stick.
Yeah, and I think Tim Ferriss did a TED talk on fear setting, where you actually consciously and overtly and proactively
work out what the worst case scenario is.
Exactly. And then but I think the takeaway is dispassionately evaluating these things. So rather than let those fears and thoughts get in the driving seat, it's actually say, no, you're in the passenger seat right now, and we're going to go through those destinations that you're throwing up, right? And use our little sat nav here and say, is that actually taking us in a path that's aligned with my values and beliefs? Or no, that's, irrational, or that's highly improbable.
In that process, though, you've got to be very, I would have thought, very accepting of and being very aware of your truth, right? To be able to say, yeah, that doesn't. I think you could easily, like, someone in your position, let's say, could easily argue either way, and potentially use different values to justify a response, a decision either way. But I think you've got to be able to be very conscious of your own truth and follow that. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I've taken away from my existence is to always follow what you believe, what you believe is to be true for you, and not let that to be shifted. Because Jordan Peterson talks about that, how like he looked into the atrocities in the 20th century, like, he looked at Auschwitz, and he was like looking into how someone could be an Auschwitz guard and at the concentration camps, and because they're all human and like us, and we look at it and go, well, I'd never be like that. I'd never do that as a job. But they were also at some point saying, as they were growing up, saying, if they looked at that they'd go, no, there's no way that I would do that. But it's the incremental lies that you make to yourself along the way. It's not just pick you out from the street and go, would you like to be a concentration camp guard? And you're like, no, thank you. But it's the small incremental lies that you tell to yourself that all of a sudden you're going for a job interview to be the head guard because you followed the path of lies to yourself along the way that you don't even realize. And so you don't even know that that's probably not what you should be doing. And so I think when you're evaluating those decisions and big decisions in your life, whether that's what career path you choose, and I think also there's a lot of people on a business level like are in jobs that they don't necessarily enjoy. And they're 9 to 5, they're sheep, they're punching their ticket just to get their pay, getting 2 or 4 weeks of holiday leave a year. And it's a job that they're like, it's not lighting me up. And that could could I leave? I could leave, but what does that mean? There's a lot of uncertainty. But it's that being truthful to yourself and to say, and if that lights your fire, then great. My problem is, in the same way as what you saw in your own mirror, is that that's not acceptable for me. Like just accepting mediocrity or unhappiness is not acceptable for. You've got one opportunity in this world, in this life, so you may as well make difficult decisions that will ultimately lead to you aligning with your own values. That's what it's about. And I find that if you can follow your truth from the start, then the decision-making process becomes a lot easier. And also it's understanding that a difficult decision doesn't necessarily mean it's incorrect, right? As you know. So you're not looking for an easy answer or the easiest answer or the answer that will provide you with the less difficult outcome. But by following, as you say, by following your, what you stand for, but also being true to that and not just saying, because you could say family was your biggest focus. And that's an admirable one. I'm staying here because I believe in the family unit. That's one of my, what I believe in. But that could be correct, but way more truthful is legacy for you. And so that's what drives you to that correct decision. So I think there's an element of being able to channel truthfulness within yourself, first and foremost.
And I think for me, it's also accepting responsibility. So I think when, to your point earlier about where, you could flex one way or the other, right? When you're thinking about this action or not. I think sometimes getting some runs on the board yourself about being honest. So part of the rude realization for me, transitioning out of that relationship was realizing how poor at certain components I was in it. And I didn't realize that in the time, simply the volume of time I spent cooking, cleaning, shopping, because, we had a fairly traditional relationship around, one person more focused on work and the other more focused on home. But having that realization and sitting there and saying, no, you need to own this, right? You should have been more supportive or empathetic,
Sure,
or proactive in doing other components. And so I think that's part of, you talked before about people who might be uncomfortable with career choices or where they are, is to think about, well, what do I need to own about the situation, right? How did I reach this point? Because we're all sort of complicit in the system that we've co-created.
Yep, accept that.
And so I think that's probably a powerful step, because there's no point saying, well, you know what, my love has always been to make coffee. I'm going to go and be a barista now and leave my CEO role. You need to understand about, well, there was a certain degree of prestige that I always loved, and that's why I've stayed in this certain path. So without sort of owning your truth, you can't then, I think, objectively evaluate those other decisions.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think by doing that exercise of taking responsibility can only lead to a better outcome in your decision going forward. My one thing I wanted to ask about is, and this will help people making big decisions in their lives, whether I fear for people in relationships that are in that place. They're too scared to move. There's too much uncertainty on the other side of that decision. And same with jobs, right? They're in that job. They've been in the same job for 10 years. They don't necessarily know what they want to do, but they know that it's not here. In the same vein of, you don't have anyone on the horizon, much to your despair. Bananas up, top of the trolley. But you know that you knew that where you are right now wasn't where you want to be. but you had no idea what the future looked like. How do you have that conversation? There's a lot of strength there to be able to trust whoever you believe in or the universe or something that because you follow your truth, that will ultimately lead to the best life that you can, rather than shying away from that and the tough decisions that presents. And that life 20 years that you imagined and you're just disappointed in yourself and not acting. How do you trust that the future will be better than what you had? Because it's a known quantity here. I'm thinking about it as a job as well. It's a known quantity. You're not satisfied. There is you believe that there's better, but there's no guarantee, and you don't know what that looks like either.
But if I stay, I'm guaranteed unhappiness. So
that's enough.
Well, but it's. I think the certainty comes from acting in line with your own values. Right? That's the certainty, because even if it goes tits up, then it becomes. Well, I mean, to give you an answer a different way, when I was first working for myself in the UK, things were going well, and I thought, okay, well, I need to grow a consultancy because that's what you do. And I hired 2 people, and I had to get rid of one within about 2 weeks, right? And I'm meant to be the hiring specialist. And then the other one left after about 11 months, right? Because the business wasn't growing and there was stress around that. And also it wasn't the best fit, I think, in such a micro environment for her. And so initially that was complete failure for me, right? Success is grow a consultancy. I grew and then I shrunk. And that lasted with me for, 4 or 5 hours. And then it was like a huge burden had been lifted from me, because actually I hated managing other people. And this way I got to focus on specialism. And that has become a really favourite failure for me, because it was actually, whether it's a universe or some other force, that has aligned me perfectly with my values around expertise and technical specialism, right? And so that actually liberated me, and that's completely aligned with my values. And so even if from tomorrow I never earn another dollar and I have to go in-house again and work for someone else, completely aligned, right? So there's zero regret.
Yeah.
And so going back to that big decision, I can stay exactly where I am and I'm going to get more of the same, right? Which is mediocrity feels harsh, but, a relationship where neither of us were fully satisfied, and an environment where my boys were going to role model that for themselves. So that was guaranteed. The house was going to deliver that no matter what. Yeah. Whereas I could make a move, and maybe I could, like I have, it's 2 years hence and I haven't met someone else. But you know what? I think my boys are happier. I've definitely got a stronger relationship with them. Yeah. And I've got a rounded understanding of myself. And I think I'm in a better position for when that future relationship emerges. So it's still the right outcome, despite, as you know, some of the legal rubbish that continues to go on.
But I don't think even you see the strength there. And I hope you do at some point, can reflect in, maybe it's that person 20 years' time to look back and go, yeah, you did well. Because the amount of the strength required to do what you've done, like anybody in that situation. And I think, so my hat's off to you. And I think comes down to that belief that if you are true to yourself, follow your values, then the universe will take care of you, or that it will be better going down that path than not. And I don't have a better example of that than you.
Oh, thanks, man. But I think, was it Michael Jordan or something like that? You'll miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right?
Was that relevant?
Well, I think we were playing basketball before we got into here, but I think it's
Playing basketball is a loose term, but trying to get a ball through a hoop.
bricks around. But I think it's to that point about, I'd much rather live a life where I've tried and failed rather than taking the safe option.
And not trying at all.
Exactly.
Yeah. Beautiful. All right. Quick fire questions.
I'll get some of my pre-prepared answers. All right.
Your latest song on Spotify.
I only came across this the other day. It's quirky. Adore it. The White Lotus theme. Right, so it's a remix from a DJ called Enamore. So The White Lotus is a TV show, really quirky intro theme.
Okay.
I love my trance music, and this thing came across me the other day. Adore it.
Okay. I'll maybe Cody can put that on his playlist. I'm not a trance guy, but that's good. Only when I'm bro sessioning with you. Favorite quote?
Supposedly attributed to Supercoach Wayne Bennett of Broncos and Dolphins fame. If you stand for nothing, you fall for everything.
Okay. I like that. You stand for nothing. If you stand for nothing, you fall for everything. Very good. Thanks, Wayne. Must read book or your most gifted book?
We've got, based on the show, you've got one of them up there, Atomic Habits, James Clear. Very cool, very practical, very actionable. The one when I used to do more coaching, the one I used to recommend the most was, and I bought actually for my mum, Mind Over Mood. So written by Dennis Greenberger and Christine Pedesky. So based on cognitive behavioural therapy, and a book full of exercises about objectively, documenting, challenging, overcoming limiting beliefs.
CBDT is really fascinating.
Yeah,
and it's helped me a lot personally.
So, and you could get the first edition. That's second edition there. I forget what I paid. What I got it from my mum, maybe like $38 in Australia. You could get a first edition for probably a couple of dollars, right? If you get second hand. So not a big investment.
Sure. Most inspirational person in your life?
That was an interesting one, mate. I reflected, and it probably rotates for me based on what I'm focusing on. And so at the moment, I'm focused on legacy. And there's a guy called Damien Price who's also involved in Universal Man. And he's really interesting for me. So he's a Christian brother. So in a sense, a lot of that focus on success, right? Material success is irrelevant.
Yeah.
But he's been, teaching at sort of Catholic schools, for, a millennia at this stage. But the lasting positive impression he creates on others, right, across, guys who are now older than me, through to whatever, still currently 15-year-olds, he's able to connect no matter what. His reputation, everyone you speak to, Pricey, what a great bloke he is. Yeah. And when he's with you, right, we talk about happiness being in the present, right, there's that complete connection in the here and now and wanting to be with you and support you and listen to you. Remarkable human being.
Yeah, okay. I think that skill is good. Like that skill is noticeably good. Being present in a conversation or a moment. I remember when I was working in a law firm, the head boss was well known to the Sunshine Coast, and knowing behind the scenes, like the back of office is chaotic. Like maybe 50 people there, staff, files everywhere. It's manic, and he has a half an hour appointment, and I'm shadowing him. He sits down with the client, and it's as if nothing else exists for him. His phone's off, not in the room, but it's ringing all the time. And like it's just this conversation. Nothing else matters. And it was so, I was astounded by that, by how noticeably different that was compared to how everyone else is. And it's a skill, and it's probably what you're alluding to. It's that skill of being able to be wholly here now. I don't believe I profess it at all, but it'd be wonderful to have, to be able to work on, to be able to say, I'm just here. Doesn't matter what's going on. And that's, that's awesome. And then finally, we're compiling a list of who we can have on the podcast, famous or not, of who you think we should interview, or our guests think we should next interview or interview in the future. Who you got?
Well, a couple of names come to mind who are both Sunny Coast locals.
Oh, I'm glad you didn't say Jordan. You could say Jordan. That's fine. I'm shooting high.
Well, you
can't get any of the shots that you don't take, so you may as well. We'll flick MJ an email.
I think you should. I was going to say, I don't know if he's endorsing this latest movie that's coming out about Nike, but he's definitely featured.
Justin McNamara referred us to you, MJ.
But someone you already know, Greg Layton, and he came to mind because he's run his own podcast for a while, Chief Maker, where he interviews, CEOs and other sorts of very successful people. But I thought he would have a very interesting meta take on success and happiness, right? And the tension within there. And I mentioned to you some of the podcast episodes there where he has very successful, multinational CEOs, but that success has come at the expense of one or multiple marriages. So I think there's something there. I think there's something really powerful about the tension you're exploring here. And I think he would have a very interesting take on that, given the sample size.
Yep.
And the other guy, Gary Tramer, wonderful human being, marketing guru, so done wonders in that game. But he's recently started these things called Magic Fridays. So he's got a lovely home in Budrum and then another one further out here on the coast, where he just invites, let's say it's 30-odd families, right, once a month, and takes care of everything, all the catering. So you've got, pizza trucks or other sorts of things out there, puts all the drinks up, and his sole goal is creating this community, right? And, puts out things on WhatsApp, who's had a birthday this month, and so everyone who's had the birthday has their own cake, and we're saying happy birthday to them. So remarkable in the sense that he's achieved this traditional success, right? Yeah. Quantifying in the gadgets and the material wealth. But he is so centered and so happy, right? Every time I see him, I say, you are so happy. And here he is now giving, with his beautiful wife to this larger co-creation of this community. So he is someone who very quickly comes to mind about somehow creating both of these things. And who knows, it could be a journey over time. But exquisite human being who really stands out in both of those areas.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Oh, thank you very much for coming on.
Absolute delight.
It's infancy in the podcast, but we might be able to get you on later on and
a couple of years hence, yeah.
Maybe your basketball skills will improve.
It can't get worse.
Justin, thank you very much, man.
Pleasure, Richard.
Cheers. So that was Justin, a good friend of mine and someone obviously who has had to make some really big life decisions over the last couple of years. And I think what I tried to do today was to dig into that process a little bit deeper in the hope that it may help someone else make their big life decisions going forward. So hope you enjoyed the conversation with Justin, and thank you again for listening to the Success Times Happiness podcast. And until next time, peace.